All right, we're gonna try something a little different here. Haven't been out on the porch for a while to chat. In this case, I'm in the midst of Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Harari, which I'm enjoying a great deal, and I will certainly do a full book description on it. But what I want to do right now is take a sub-description or a deep dive into a chapter. This is not far from what I was hoping to do with the Tolstoy short stories that I was looking at, where I would read and then give some commentary. You know what? I need another pipe, so I'll be back in a bit. Okay, also trying out a new microphone here, which I don't know if it's going to help or not. You just use the internal normally. Okay, so as a brief description with the book, and I'll be putting another video up later, I think, that goes into it in more detail, but I may jump in and take individual chapters in this way. This is, as it says, basically the entire span of humanity, looking at various aspects of it. And running from really the Paleolithic, you know, and the hominid eras and whatnot, through to modern time. Now, the chapter that I'm in the midst of right now is part of a section about the kinds of myths that collectively we as humans believe in, which is a result of the cognitive revolution by modern theory and by a lot of modern theory, etc. But the particular slice that I'm looking at right now talked about religious beliefs, which is one of those myths that draws us together. Now, you know, earlier periods of it have talked about, you know, the initial animist type of explanations that worked, moving on into polytheistic and then monotheistic religions. But I found this particular chapter especially interesting because it actually relates to thoughts that I've had for a long time that are somewhat heretical in modern thinking. The section is the worship of man, and in it he basically makes an argument that the modern era has I'll quote him here, the modern era has witnessed the rise of a number of new natural law religions such as liberalism, communism, capitalism, nationalism, and Nazism. These creeds do not like to be called religions and refer to themselves as ideologies, but this is just a semantic exercise. Part of this is based on his definition of religion. And it's a working definition that, like, that a religion is a system of human norms and values that is founded on belief in a superhuman order. And by taking that definition, then he argues that communism is no less a religion than Islam. Now, I have something further to go with this, which I don't think he's willing to brush into, which is something I call scientism. But let's put that aside, and I'll get to that in a bit. Now, a lot of people have equated communism with something of a religion. You know, part of it being Marx's own religion is the opiate of the people argument. But then communism essentially is a replacement for these religious beliefs. But in a lot of ways, as an ideology, it's not that different in in nature than other ideologies are, right? And it kind of brings together this close linkage of, look, the same kinds of things that are making us believe in our religious beliefs are the same sorts of mechanisms that make us believe in these more ideologically based beliefs. And he's a little fuzzy on some of this, in my opinion, not in his language or whatever, but more in his thinking, because, see, if someone's a polytheist, they cannot also be a monotheist. And on the other hand, with some of the ideologies that he's putting forth, especially the humanist ones, he actually kind of argues without religion, these don't even make sense for the most part. Which makes them very, very different from the religious structures, which kind of don't require an ideological basis to them. For the most part, I'm sure there are exceptions. I can't think of any. And here's a little Venn diagram. Oh, shit me. Here's a little Venn diagram here that he shows, which divides human norms and values and belief in supernatural in a superhuman order, not supernatural necessarily. And he splits football into the human norms and values. It's a set of rules, etc., that we have to follow, but it's completely derived from, human imagination and whatever. It's not something given to us by God. We change it to make the game better or worse. And over in the belief in superhuman order, he puts the theory of relativity in that, look, this doesn't have to be some external God or something, but the natural understanding of this thing, our scientific understanding that leads to something like theory of relativity, it has nothing to do with human norms, right? It has nothing to do with society. And religion is where these two intersect in his argument. And it makes a nice diagram that works with his working definition of what a religion is. Things like Islam and Buddhism, as well as communism, all fall into that religion category, that intersection. And you can use whatever term you like for it, but he wants something that collectively includes both ideologies and what we would traditionally call religions. And then he makes, in each case, right, so from Islam, there is, and Christianity as well, etc. There's basically dictates from God that come down that we must follow, right? And then they influence and are where we derive our human norms and values from. With Buddhism, it's more like a natural law type of thing, as discovered by the Buddha. And again, it influences how people interact and deal with one another. With communism, it's principles as discovered, invented, whatever you want to say, by Marx, but again, derived from the actual, facts that he was able to look at, etc. The same way that we, deal in sciences, is we look at facts and we extrapolate a hypothesis, etc. Well, Marx essentially does the same, as do other ideologies. You could look at Adam Smith and say the same kind of thing with capitalism. And then that this influences and directs our norms and values. I gotta check the time on this. Okay, we gotta cut for a bit. Using this camera with the tripod is such a pain in the ass, and then the mic was even more problematic. Let me know if that mic does a great deal of bonus. I may try to get something a little bit more functional, but it's a pain the way it connects on this camera and everything. I probably should have used one of my wife's cameras. The mic probably doesn't involve having to open up the panel to clip the mic onto. But anyway, now one of his arguments is that in terms of the ideologies, or the more ideological beliefs, they don't necessarily restrict you in the same way that religions do. For example, again, a capitalist, well, he's going to put it as a liberalism, a liberalist, a modern liberal believer, is not in any way restrained from believing in, one of the monotheistic gods or whatever. And in fact, he actually argues that liberalism is somewhat hard to justify without a deist view of things. That the basis is really tough to argue outside of that. I'm not sure how much I believe in that. One can, I think, argue. Anyway, he sees that as something of a contradiction to be an atheist liberal. But in a very similar way, a Buddhist was in no way prevented from believing in and worshiping the Hindu gods, or whatever gods they followed as well. It was just one thing is based on the reality, the underlying laws and everything, and the other is there's supernatural powerful beings. That's fine. None of that really has anything to do with this, and even if they can aid you or whatever, it doesn't matter. And he argues nationalism, free market capitalism, all of these things, they're basically, you might take it from evidence, you might take it from logic, but you might do the same with your religions as well, right? The Thomists, followers of Thomas Aquinas, believe very much, it's a very Catholic belief system, but one of its fundamental principles is that St. Thomas argued from reason and from the surrounding observations that there must be a God, and that it must be the Christian God, but that's outside of things. Now, he makes a distinction here that, humanism is a belief that Homo sapiens has a unique and sacred nature which is fundamentally different from the nature of all other animals and all other phenomena. That the unique nature of Homo sapiens is the most important thing in the world and determines everything that happens in the universe. Yeah, I don't know if that's true, but then he goes on to say all humanists worship humanity. Worship is maybe the wrong word here. Revere, respect, I don't know. Just as, and they can fight over the definition of humanity just as rival Christian sects fought over the definition of God. Here he says the most important humanist sect is liberal humanism, which believes that humanity is a quality of individual humans and that the liberty of individuals is therefore sacrosanct. According to liberals, the sacred nature of humanity resides within each and every individual Homo sapiens. The inner core of individual humans gives meaning to the world and is the source for all ethical and political authority. I don't know if that belief is necessary. I think rather one could argue that humanism comes from our shared compact. And I find this kind of disturbing, that it's really more a matter of, look, I don't want my life to be, taken. I don't want to be abused and treated poorly. And what I would see is that, and each individual person feels that way, so collectively our society should represent that. I think that's an argument that can be made. Now, he's basically saying that you get humanism of this nature through monotheism, and that may be historically correct, but I think one can make a relatively sound argument for humanist beliefs outside of any kind of religious dictate. Or external requirement for that to be the case. That it's just in our best interests as a species for each individual, or not even as a species, it's just in our best interests. And we're acting on our own best interest, and that's a natural law there, rather than having to be a godly proposal. And thus you could make a utilitarian argument for liberalism, and I think that's a fair argument to make. Anyway, in doing so, he makes an argument that, we'll avoid that one. Yeah, he says it's in fact founded on monotheistic beliefs. The liberal belief in the free and sacred nature of each individual is a direct legacy of the traditional Christian belief. Without recourse to eternal souls and a creator God, it becomes embarrassingly difficult for liberals to explain what is so special about individual sapiens. Yeah, I don't buy that. I argue against that vociferously. And certainly there are many, like, the majority of atheists I know are relatively hold a relatively liberalist view of, and I like using that because if you're going to say liberalism, it's got to be liberalist, right? View of how our society should be structured and whatever. And I don't mean, I just mean that individual humans should be respected and their rights valued. Now he looks at another sect, which is socialist humanism. Socialists believe that humanity is a collective rather than individualistic. They hold sacred not the inner voice of each individual, but the species as a whole. For individual humans, socialist humanism seeks equality between all humans. According to socialists, inequality is the worst blasphemy against the sanctity of humanity. So, here I would argue they are very closely related, actually. So this sort of socialist view that everyone should be equal, is that so different than that everyone should have equal opportunities, for example, right? And if I simply, again, don't agree that these are necessarily distinct things. Just as the liberal concept that everyone has certain rights, well, one of those rights may be a certain level of equality being provided, and even equity being provided for the individuals. So the same kind of compact from which rises the idea that in order to protect myself and my right to free speech, for example, I have to defend your right to free speech as well. That same sort of compact seems to me to kind of apply to, in order to defend my right to be able to feed and care for my family, I'm defending your right to do so. And I, again, feel like he's drawing too distinct a line here. Like liberal humanism, socialist humanism is built on monotheistic foundations. Yes, it is, but it doesn't have to be. The idea that all humans are equal is a revamped version of the monotheistic conviction that all souls are equal before God. So now, he goes to the thing that really triggered me here rather nicely. The only humanist sect that has actually broken loose from traditional monotheism is evolutionary humanism. Now, I've argued that you can loosen the others from any god. You don't need a god to give your individual perspective value. You're sitting in it. I would say that the individual has self-interest, and that enlightened self-interest is the issue at play here. He doesn't play on that at all, and doesn't touch on that at all. And I think enlightened self-interest is actually vital to a certain period, at least, of liberalism. And I think by extension, you could argue socialism could be founded on the same principles. What distinguished the Nazis from other humanist sects, so evolutionary humanism, he says the most famous representatives of the Nazis, what distinguished the Nazis from other humanist sects was a different definition of humanity, one deeply influenced by the theory of evolution. In contrast to other humanists, Nazis believed that humankind is not something universal and eternal, but rather a mutable species that can evolve and degenerate. Man can evolve into Superman or degenerate into subhuman. Okay. And we see where that got things, right? And this was a widely held, so the underlying principles that the Nazis evoked in a lot of ways were very, very broadly held. Up until when? I mean, you know, certainly the mid-century, the mid-20th century, and where, you know, just inherently there were societies, etc., that were based on one race being inferior to another, and just this kind of view of that. And I think it still persists. A lot of those underlying views still persist there. In one way or another. But that led me to a thought of where I kind of sit, because my initial thought was, wow, out of everything here, I think I come closest to that evolutionary humanism. But then I realized, no, I kind of don't. I'm not focused on humans nor on evolution itself, but rather on maybe a progression or exploration of the space, not just of humanity, but exploration of the space of all of evolution and of all of what nature plays forth. Which is why, you get me like saying things that, look, AI are our progeny. We might want to just simply support them and say, look, we've gone as far as we kind of likely can. And it's along the lines of an argument that C.S. Lewis put forth as a kind of a straw man type of argument against the idea of like this sort of evolutionary humanism, which was one of the baddies was arguing why it's necessary for us to have industrial progression and to rigorously order our society in this sort of way that allows for the most of that, was that and it was essentially put as the cutting blow to that was, okay, so what you want to do is spread out to other planets with some future descendant of humanity that may or may not have anything to do with you. But in a sense, that is the nature of our biological imperative, right? Our biological imperative is to keep sending our DNA out, and if we evolve and change into something else, that's okay, right? That's fine, because that something else is suited to whatever it moved to, whatever changes there were. And I would argue beyond that DNA itself, this little chemical construct, is in a way less pure and less beautiful than an intellectual construct. And we're more likely to be tainted and to lose whatever sort of belief structure we have, etc., the social formation, if we're allowed to mutate and continue evolving under those slow rates, whereas something that's based on principles, something we created, may be actually more purely representative of what we are, what our souls are, if you would. Not that I'm one that believes in souls, but if there's anything of that nature, it feels like it's actually built more on our social structures and our belief systems than it is in the actual chemical physical processes that are going on within us. And if that's the case, then our true progeny isn't, whatever hominids turn into in the future, but rather it's something that embodies that more intellectual side as at its core than the chemical reactions at the core. Anyway, I just thought it was an interesting look at the combination there. Goes against this. The future of evolutionary humanism is unclear. For 60 years after the end of the war against Hitler, it was taboo to link humanism with evolution and to advocate using biological methods to upgrade Homo sapiens. But today, such projects are back in vogue. Nobody speaks about exterminating lower races, but many contemplating using our knowledge of human biology to create superhumans. I'm kind of in that boat, but less for creating the biological humans and more for creating something that is more fundamentally representative of what we actually believe in, who we are at this moment. Let me check the battery situation. I'd hate... Yeah, it's almost out, and I want to talk a little bit more, so I will be back. I'm wondering now what I wanted to talk about that was so important to me. Although I found something else. He's saying a huge gulf is opening between the tenets of liberal humanism and the latest findings of the life sciences. A gulf we cannot ignore much longer. Our liberal political and judicial systems are founded on the belief that every individual has a sacred inner nature, indivisible and immutable, which gives meaning to the world. This is a reincarnation of the traditional Christian belief in a free and eternal soul. Yet over the last 200 years, life sciences have thoroughly undermined this belief. Scientists studying the inner workings of the human organism have found no soul there. Yeah, again, not important, right? These structures that we create, these religions, these ideologies, etc., they're for the promotion of, they happen because they're convenient, right? They're convenient, and they enhance the lives of the possibility of procreation of the people contained within them, right? Of course, if you look at species, other than humans, what species have done the best? Our food, our pets, right? They increasingly argue that human behavior is determined by hormones, genes, and synapses rather than by free will. The same forces that determine the behavior of chimpanzees, wolves, and ants. Well, I totally agree that it's the same forces. I'm not sure that I disavow free will. I don't know what free will would be, but I think it can be defined down in a way that represents something that aligns with my concept of animistic spirits and whatnot. Our judicial and political systems largely try to sweep such inconvenient discoveries under the carpet. I gotta deal with that. I'll be back. Well, the point is that that's all completely irrelevant under the construction that I'm putting forth as to how and why these societal constructs actually have occurred, which is that they're evolutionarily advantageous to the participants. And the way that they're able to be advantageous is by, promoting growth and all that. And if that's the understanding, and you work from them with the sort of enlightened self-interest, compact idea as to why they formed the way they did to some extent, which is kind of irrelevant. Why they formed is kind of unimportant. What's important is what value they still have in the current and modern era, and what value they'll have in the future towards, promotion of, maintenance of that DNA from an evolutionary prospect, but also that evolutionary prospect, that's going to go on no matter what, right? We're at a unique point where we can actually choose different paths of what our progeny will look like. And I use that term for, a mechanistic or AI-based progeny, but it would also apply to whatever we produce biologically. We're at the point where we have the capability to start tinkering with our biology. And we're at a fork in the road in a sense. We could choose one path or the other. We could probably choose a middle path too. I don't know what that would end up like. That's probably where we're going to end up. to be honest, and it is probably going to end up in a fight between the biological engineered humans of the future and the mechanical engineered AIs of the future, or something like that. But who knows? They say our judicial and political systems largely try to sweep such inconvenient discoveries under the carpet. They don't matter. But in all frankness, how long can we maintain a wall separating the Department of Biology from the Departments of Law and Political Science? Oh, well, not just biology, but here's the thing. Political science, and more importantly, philosophy, ethics, whatnot, are absolutely vital in our path going forward. We should be doing this deliberatively, and we're not. Why should we do it deliberatively? I don't know. Evolution's not deliberative, right? It tries things out. The things that work succeed. The things that don't die off. Why isn't that sufficient? It might be. It might be. It may be that the chaos that we're spawning is perfectly fine. But rather than being buffeted by the forces of chaos and have the future, because it's not our future, we're going to die, okay? The next generation might not, but we're dying. At least this one is. Hopefully real soon. Why not take the chance to be gods? Right? Why not take the chance to have a significant and structured and determined will in what the future will be? I don't know. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think humanity has that capability. I think there's individual humans who have that capability to try, but it's the conflict and the struggle and whatever that'll determine what wins out. So, knowledge of that conflict and struggle, if anybody's clever enough to be able to start constructing something deliberately, knowledge of that future conflict's likelihood probably has to be baked into the design. That's a sad thing, because we don't want to build war into whatever the future is, right? War doesn't seem like a good idea. War is terrible, especially for us biological creatures who suffer. But I would imagine that we'd have to build some sort of suffering mechanism, into any mechanical construct we made, because the suffering is our learning is a learning mechanism for us. Pain is a learning mechanism. Emotional suffering is a learning mechanism as well, I believe. And the simple act of learning could be seen as a form of suffering in the mechanical equivalent. Of course, we don't know how it'll express, whether it'll be unpleasant. Like, I feel like there's a certain unpleasantness to finding out that something didn't work and it's wrong, right? Like, we have that tied into our biological reality. And maybe I'm just analogizing there when there's nothing equivalent when an AI is told, you failed, you didn't meet the acceptance criteria on this answer, right? Okay, I changed my weights. It's just what happens. There's no biological hurt there in the same way that there is when we fail at something. So maybe it's okay for AIs to learn in a way that, for us, it's important, but learning almost invariably entails some kind of ouchy moment of some sense or another. Anyway, I don't know if that went where I expected it to or not, but this book is really making me think a lot about a lot of different things. You know, I had been stuck in the era of Harris in terms of anthropology, and I still believe in a lot of what's there, but he's a little loose with some things, popularized anthropology. And I think this is helping me refine, my thoughts and whatnot. Anyway, let's send this up. A bit of an addendum, and I'm just going to kind of pace around while giving views of the nature or whatever. Maybe you'll see a deer. I don't think so. I don't hear any around recently. Last week, it's already Wednesday, but on Friday when I went dancing, I got I get there early and I start drinking a little early, but I go in to claim a table. My favorite spot was taken, but I asked, it looked like people I kind of recognized from as being there, and I didn't think they would have a lot of, I didn't think they had a big group coming or anything like that, so I asked if I could join them, and I did. And then, one of the couple, the male, asked me to expound on what my cult is, which is kind of weird. Like, we've never really talked or anything. I have no idea why he would put it in that terms, and I'm like, well, there kind of isn't one, but if there was, and then I ended up giving him a spiel about our future progeny, the AI, etc., and a whole bunch of other stuff in my drunken existence. It was kind of amusing to do. Probably not too different from what I do on video, to be honest. He was not convinced, but I think, I don't know. I think something settled in on his female companion out of some of what I was saying. It's hard to tell. But anyway, it was just kind of intriguing that I wanted to note that in here because it'll never get noted anywhere else, I'm sure. Or maybe it'll get noted many other places by me because it really stuck in my head. I don't know. All right, up it goes.